At Fort Bragg, where warriors are forged in fire, one soldier stood apart, not because of his rank, but because of his scars. In the farthest corner of the military kennels, a German shepherd named Ranger lay motionless, his once promising career shattered by tragedy. He had been labeled untrainable, a lost cause, a liability that no one dared to take on. No one except Lieutenant Ethan Carter. Where others saw fear, Carter saw something else, something familiar. A soul battered by war, a fighter who had been given up on too soon. Ignoring the warnings, he made a choice that would change both their lives forever. But what happened next defied every expectation. Because sometimes, the most broken warriors are the ones destined to become legends. And Ranger? He was about to prove that the greatest battles aren't won on the battlefield. They're won in the heart.
The bitter January wind whipped across Fort Bragg's sprawling training grounds, carrying with it the echoes of distant gunfire from the practice ranges. Lieutenant Ethan Carter pulled his tactical jacket closer, his boots crunching against frozen earth as he made his way through the military working dog kennels. The cold had driven most of the canines inside, their usual chorus of barks muted by the weather, but it was the absolute silence from one particular kennel that drew him like a beacon. In the furthest corner of the compound, pressed against chain link and concrete, a young German shepherd lay motionless, his black and tan coat dulled by neglect. The dog's eyes, amber pools of resignation, tracked Carter's approach without hope, a gaze the lieutenant knew too well from his own reflection during those endless nights at Walter Reed. Master Sergeant James Willis materialized from the kennel office, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "With respect, sir, you don't want to waste your time there," he called out, limping slightly from an old injury that had relegated him from field work to kennel management. "That one's been marked for discharge. Some dogs just aren't cut out for service." Carter's hand unconsciously moved to his left shoulder, where a spider's web of scars lay hidden beneath his uniform, a souvenir from the same IED that had taken 3 of his team members in Afghanistan. "Tell me about him," he said quietly, not taking his eyes off the shepherd. Willis consulted a worn clipboard, his weathered face growing somber. "Came from a specialized training program in Texas, run by Staff Sergeant James Mitchell. Mitchell was a legend in the EOD community, had a way with dogs like nothing I've ever seen. This one was his personal project, showed incredible promise in early detection work." The sergeant's voice caught slightly. "Then 3 months ago, during a routine training exercise, something went wrong. IED they were working with detonated prematurely. Mitchell didn't make it." Carter closed his eyes, remembering another explosion, another loss. Staff Sergeant Sarah Martinez, his team's medic, had been just 2 weeks from retirement when she stepped on that pressure plate. They'd been laughing about her plans to open a bakery just moments before. Sometimes he could still smell the chocolate chip cookies she'd shared that morning, mixed with the acrid stench of cordite. "The dog was there?" Carter asked, though he already knew the answer. The shepherd's 1,000-yard stare told its own story. "Too close," Willis confirmed. "Caught some shrapnel, but the physical wounds healed. The rest," he gestured helplessly. "Can't handle loud noises now. Freezes up during drills. Complete shutdown during thunderstorms. Captain Hayes wanted him gone weeks ago, but Mitchell's reputation bought some time. That's running out." Carter studied the shepherd more closely. Despite his current state, the dog's conformation spoke of excellent breeding, the broad chest, the intelligent slope of his skull, the powerful haunches that marked him as a working line German shepherd. But it was something else that held Carter's attention, the way the dog tracked every movement, while pretending not to, the hypervigilance masked as defeat. It was a survival mechanism Carter knew intimately. "Has anyone worked with him one-on-one since Mitchell?" Carter asked, already suspecting the answer. Resources were always stretched thin, and a traumatized dog was an easy sacrifice in a program that demanded battle-ready K9s. Willis's silence was answer enough. Finally, he said, "Captain Hayes made his position clear. We need dogs that can deploy, not." He trailed off, gesturing vaguely at the shepherd's huddled form. The mention of Hayes sent a familiar surge of frustration through Carter. Captain Morgan Hayes was everything Carter had grown to resent about military bureaucracy, a commander who saw soldiers and dogs alike as interchangeable parts in a machine, who measured value solely in terms of immediate utility. To Hayes, a traumatized dog was no different from a broken rifle, something to be discarded and replaced. "I'll take him," Carter declared, his voice carrying the same quiet certainty that had once led him back into a firefight to retrieve Martinez's body, against direct orders. Willis's eyebrows shot up. "Sir, with all due respect, you've got the new tactical training program to oversee. Captain Hayes would never dash." "Then we don't tell Hayes," Carter interrupted, a plan already forming. "Not until we have something to show him. What's the dog's designation?" "K9 Unit 2847. Willis read from his clipboard. "Never really took to it, though. Mitchell had started calling him something else, but after, well, we just stuck with the number." Carter opened the kennel gates slowly, deliberately. The shepherd watched him with that same resigned wariness, but didn't retreat further into his corner. "Hey there, buddy," Carter said softly, crouching down and extending his hand palm up. "How about we call you Ranger?" The dog's ear twitched at the name, and for just a moment, something flickered in those haunted amber eyes, a ghost of what he must have been before tragedy struck. Carter felt an answering resonance in his own scarred soul, remembering the day his sister Catherine had found him drinking alone in his apartment, 3 months after losing his team. She'd taken one look at him and said, "Either you let this break you, or you let it remake you. Your choice, big brother." That night, long after the base had grown quiet, Carter returned to the kennels. He'd spent the afternoon buried in research, learning everything he could about trauma responses in military working dogs. The standard training protocols wouldn't work, they'd only reinforce Ranger's fears. They needed something different, something that would work with his trauma rather than against it. Ranger was more alert in the darkness, his head raising as Carter approached with a leash and a pocket full of high-value treats. In the quiet of night, away from the constant activity of the base, some of his anxiety seemed to ease. "Just you and me tonight, buddy," Carter whispered, moving slowly as he clipped the leash. "No expectations, no pressure. We're going to figure this out together." They started with simple walks around the empty training grounds, Carter maintaining a steady stream of quiet conversation. He told Ranger about growing up in Montana, about the search and rescue dog that had found him when he got lost in the woods at age 7. He talked about Catherine's letters, arriving like clockwork every week during his deployments, and about Martinez's cookies, and about the nightmares that still woke him sweating and shaking. Gradually, night after night, Ranger began to respond. First it was just the slight pressure of his body against Carter's leg during their walks, then the tentative acceptance of treats from Carter's hand. By the end of the second week, he would actually meet Carter's eyes for brief moments, something the kennel staff hadn't seen since Mitchell's death. But it was during their third week together that Carter discovered something extraordinary. He'd set up a simple scent detection exercise, hiding treats in various locations around the training course. Ranger was working through them methodically when a car backfired in the distance. Instead of his usual panic, Ranger pressed against Carter's leg, looked up for reassurance, and then, after receiving a quiet, "Good boy," returned to his task. More remarkably, when Ranger encountered certain chemical compounds similar to those used in explosives, he displayed a unique reaction. Instead of the standard alert position taught in K9 training, he would freeze and paw persistently at the ground. Carter recognized it as a learned response, something Mitchell must have inadvertently reinforced during their time together. The breakthrough came during a routine training exercise with Carter's tactical response team. Ranger, who had been quietly shadowing their movements, suddenly went rigid. Before Carter could process what was happening, the dog began pawing frantically at a patch of disturbed earth. "Clear the area!" Carter shouted, recognizing Ranger's signal. The training squad scattered just as the EOD team confirmed what Ranger had already known: a live landmine, left over from an old training exercise buried inches below the surface. The incident caused a stir on base, but Captain Hayes remained unimpressed. "Lucky coincidence," he declared during a tense meeting in his office. "That dog is a liability, Lieutenant. One loud noise during a critical moment could get our people killed." "Sir, with respect," Carter argued, "Ranger's detection skills are exceptional. His trauma response has actually enhanced his ability to dash. I want him out of the program by the end of the week." Hayes interrupted. "That's an order, Lieutenant." Carter left the office with his fists clenched, the familiar taste of copper in his mouth. He found Ranger waiting outside, pressed against the wall but present, watching. The sight centered him, reminded him why he'd taken on this fight. That night, they trained harder than ever. Carter had noticed that while Ranger still struggled with unexpected loud noises, he could handle them if he was prepared and felt secure. They worked on building his confidence through a series of carefully structured exercises, each success reinforcing their growing bond. But fate had other plans. 2 days before Hayes' deadline, Ranger's behavior suddenly changed during a routine patrol. His pawing became urgent, frantic in a way Carter had never seen before. Following protocol, Carter called in the EOD team. What they found sent shockwaves through the entire command structure: real explosives, recently planted, with components that matched missing materials from the base's storage facility. The discovery launched an immediate investigation, revealing a civilian contractor with connections to a domestic terror cell planning a coordinated attack on military installations. The night they moved to arrest the suspect, everything went wrong. The contractor had backup waiting outside the base, and the ensuing firefight turned the quiet military installation into a war zone. In the chaos, one of the terrorists managed to pull a grenade. Time seemed to slow as Carter watched the small metal sphere arc through the air, its trajectory carrying it directly toward a group of young soldiers taking cover behind a vehicle. In that frozen moment, he saw Martinez's smile, heard Mitchell's last transmission, felt the heat of that Afghan sun. Then a black and tan blur launched past him. Ranger hit the terrorist with the precision of a missile, knocking him off balance. The grenade rolled away from the gathered troops, detonating harmlessly against an empty vehicle. When the smoke cleared, Ranger stood in the debris field, singed but unbowed, his eyes locked on Carter with an expression that seemed to say, "Did I do good?" The aftermath brought changes no one could have predicted. Captain Hayes personally recommended Ranger for the Navy and Marine Corps Medal, the highest non-combat award for heroism, the first time it had ever been awarded to a military working dog. More importantly, he acknowledged what Carter had known all along: sometimes the deepest wounds create the strongest warriors. Today, Ranger still patrols Fort Bragg, sporting a custom harness that identifies him as a decorated K-9 officer. His story has become required reading at the military working dog school, teaching handlers that trauma doesn't equal defeat, and that patience and understanding can transform even the most troubled soul into something extraordinary. Carter, now a captain himself, often finds Ranger waiting by his office door at the end of long days. They walk the grounds together, two warriors who found healing in each other's broken places. Sometimes they stop by the memorial wall where Mitchell's and Martinez's names are engraved, and Carter swears Ranger stands a little straighter, a little prouder, as if knowing he's continuing their legacy. The Ranger Protocol has revolutionized how the military approaches traumatized working dogs, emphasizing patience, understanding, and the recognition that sometimes the most exceptional soldiers, human or canine, come with battle scars. Training programs across all branches now incorporate elements of trauma-informed handling, and the success rate for rehabilitating dogs has increased dramatically. Catherine visits sometimes, bringing her children who squeal with delight at their Uncle Ranger. The dog who once couldn't handle loud noises now gently tolerates their excited voices, his tail wagging as tiny hands pat his fur. Carter watches these moments with a full heart, remembering that trembling shepherd in the corner kennel. Every morning, as the sun rises over Fort Bragg, Ranger and Carter start their day with a walk past the kennels where their story began. Sometimes they stopped to watch new handlers working with dogs others might have given up on, applying the lessons they taught the military about patience, trust, and the healing power of understanding. And in quiet moments, when the weight of memory threatens to overwhelm him, Carter feels Ranger's solid presence against his leg and remembers the words that changed both their lives. That one's not worth your time. He looks at his partner, now confident and capable, and silently thanks whatever twist of fate brought them together. Because sometimes the most powerful weapons in our arsenal aren't the ones that make the loudest noise. They're the ones that teach us to listen to the quiet voices, the ones that remind us that every soul deserves a chance to prove its worth. In the end, Ranger's legacy isn't just about the bombs he's detected or the lives he's saved. It's about the countless other dogs and people who've been given second chances because of his example. It's about the power of looking past labels and seeing the potential that lies beneath the surface. And most of all, it's about the extraordinary things that can happen when one person refuses to accept that anything is truly broken beyond repair. As the sun sets on another day at Fort Bragg, Carter watches Ranger playing with a group of children from the base's family housing area. The once fearful dog now gently accepts their attention, his tail wagging as tiny hands pat his fur. "See?" Carter whispers to the ghosts of those they've lost along the way. He wasn't the missing piece. He was the piece that showed us what we were missing all along. And somewhere, in the gathering dusk, he swears he can smell chocolate chip cookies on the breeze, and hear Mitchell's quiet laugh, and feel the pride of all those who gave their lives so others might learn to live again. Because in the end, that's what Ranger taught them all, that sometimes the bravest thing we can do is simply refuse to give up on each other.